For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Ian Wright. I'm Provincial Grand Master of the Mark Province of Oxfordshire. I would first of all like to welcome you all to our virtual class of improvement. Under different circumstances, this class of improvement would have been a physical gathering where we would rehearse ritual and discuss Masonic topics. But as this is a virtual meeting, we are now bound under the guidance of the Grand Lodge of Mark Master Masons, and as such, we cannot discuss ritual itself. This is merely, this evening, a gathering of like-minded individuals to hear, I hope, a very interesting presentation. I'd like to welcome those of you to our group who are new to the group and make a special mention of, in particular, the Most Worshipful Grand Master of the Honourable Fraternity of Ancient Freemasons, the Deputy Grand Secretary of the Order of Women's Freemasons, rulers of and in our orders, provincial and district heads of orders, past heads of orders, Grand Lodge officers, but especially our brethren who have joined us from around the world. I do hope that you all enjoy this presentation, and I'd now like to hand you over to Worshipful Brother Matthew Christmas for his paper entitled The Disappearance of Noachite Masonry and What Happened to Noah and His Family. Matthew.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. And if I could start with 3 caveats and 2 thank yous, please. There's an awful lot I could say about this topic, but time's against us. And I'm hoping to write a book one day. And so hopefully that will be useful. But I'm hoping at the very least, this will inspire you to become a Royal Ark Mariner, if you're not one, or encourage you to look again at Ark Masonry if you already are one. It should certainly, however, make you appreciate the importance of Noah and his family in the development of our Masonic rituals, even though he's been virtually written out of our history. Secondly, I must apologise if you're not of the Christian faith, because there are some Christian concepts in this talk, and that's because Noachite Masonry was established in the craft before it was de-Christianised. And thirdly, whilst I'm going to try and look at Noachite Masonry in the round, including in the USA, this talk inevitably does focus on the British Isles and finishes where we are today under the Grand Lodge of Mark Master Masons. I'd like to give credit where credit is very much due and thank the very many Masons in the UK and the USA, and quite a few of you are here today, who have contributed on ideas and helped me. And I'll acknowledge you properly if I ever write something down. And it is great to see so many of you here, not just from our own Grand Lodge, but also from ones all over the world, some of you in the middle of the night, and also from our sister jurisdictions. I think the only good thing about lockdown has been the massive growth in educational Masonic Zooms all over the world. And it has been great to get to know many of you virtually. What you don't know is, of course, you have to now join the Mark Province of Oxfordshire. So I'm going to start with the Royal Ark Mariner degree, and then I'm going to move into some more uncharted territory. I'm going to start off with a quotation, quite a long one. To many Masons who do not know much about it, the Royal Ark Mariner degree can seem to be just a quaint, short little degree about Noah's flood, whose members wear rather silly rainbow-coloured aprons. Now, it may be attached to the hugely popular Mark degree in England and Wales, but it's often dismissed of being of very little ritual significance. This could not be more wrong. Those who are elevated as Royal Ark Mariners and who take the slightest interest in Ark Masonry soon realise that it is simple and beautiful rather than superficial or trivial. However, there's a great deal more to it than that. As the late Grand Librarian, Brother Hanfield Jones, wrote, although the ceremony is short, yet it fulfills the canon of a genuine initiatory rite, and its symbolism is worthy of deep study. The candidate may enter the lodge room blindfolded, clothed in the habiliments of a distressed Mason, but he completes the ritual elevation at the foot of the ceremony in a very different state. The great point about the Royal Ark Mariner, as many have said, is that it further develops the idea, which is the key of initiation. That is the making of a new beginning or the adoption of a new outlook in life. Now, actually, I wrote that in my article on the Royal Ark Mariners in issue 15 of Freemasons Today at the end of 2000. And 20 years later, and a lot more degrees later, it's still my favourite degree. But there is much more to the role of Noah and his family, immediate and past, in Freemasonry than many may realise, or at least they used to be. So, what am I going to cover? So, I hope you're not put off by the mystical 7 number of subtopics, and I hopefully won't keep you too long. So, first of all, the Royal Ark Mariner degree as we know it. This, above all, celebrates the providence and mercy of God in saving Noah and his family from the destruction meted out to all others. The actions of Noah and the symbol of the ark are particularly apposite. The master, referred to as the commander and representing Noah, speaks of his wardens as his sons, Japheth and Shem. This might seem a little contrived or absurdly quaint, but the exchange between the 3 principal officers are appropriately filial and most instructive. The ritual focuses on the attributes and virtues exemplified by Noah, and the symbolic use of the working tools are beautifully and informatively explained. The explanation of the steps taken to move, as in Masonry, from the west to the east, is particularly important in this degree, as are the addresses by the 3 principal officers to the candidate after the new Ark Mariner has been entrusted with the secrets. The candidates are clearly, and particularly in this fraternity, kindly instructed in their obligations to others and to God. Above all, there is a different feel about this degree than many others. And this is, of course, if you're not in it, difficult to explain. The degree is not homely. The symbolism in Ark Masonry is anything but basic, but there is a real closeness between the new members and the candidate. Indeed, the commander installation ritualistically stresses this very real bond, and the address to the new commander by the outgoing commander is particularly apt. Indeed, since the ritual was reissued in 1994, the commander always speaks of Ark Masonry as a fraternity of Royal Ark Masons, rather than merely as a degree. In fact, it's only described as a degree 4 times now in the English ritual. Both ceremonies of elevation and of installation are in fact very natural and do not in fact feel contrived. The impression, in addition to their fraternal message, is probably that's the secret of the Ark Mariner degree. Like both craft and mark, the Ark Mariner has referenced that great Masonic allegory of building, although in this degree, the issue is not how to build something, but rather the ceremony celebrates a man who did so, in this case the patriarch Noah in his construction of the ark, which the ritual describes beautifully as an ark of safety. Furthermore, it teaches the futility of relying on any human endeavour or expedient to escape divine justice without the direct instructions of the Almighty. Obedience to the deity is not to be avoided or feared, but to be embraced. For me, also, one of the other delights of this degree is that the regalia you can see on your screen is very simple. In fact, there's not much more of it. In addition, as there is no provincial or district officer structure as such, all administration above lodge level is taken by the mark hierarchy. And this means that Mariner is blessed with few titles and little fuss. This is perhaps the only real current benefit, in my opinion, of being attached to the mark, despite the fact the degrees have no ritual connections whatsoever. Simple regalia and little concern over rank and title. It means that when Ark Mariners gather, they come together for the ceremonies and the fellowship, and the degree lives up to its name as an honourable fraternity. This fits so well with a simple, unfussy, cluttered ceremony. One grows to appreciate the beauty and clarity of Ark Mariner ceremonies. So secondly, where does Noah fit before Masonry was established? There is no doubt that the story of Noah and the Great Flood has been performed and dramatically interpreted in these islands from as early as the 13th century in the various mystery plays of the medieval Christian church. These dramas were very popular until they were suppressed in the 16th century as part of the Reformation. The mysteries enacted the event of the Bible from the fall of Lucifer to the Day of Judgment in a series of pageants ranging in number to almost 50 in some cycles. Each pageant or section of the story was performed by a different trade guild, often with a humorous or macabre connection between the métier and the playlet. Thus, in many places, it was the carpenters who enacted the crucifixion, the butchers that of Abraham and Isaac, while many times it was masons who staged the tale of Noah and the flood. By the 15th century, the plays had been written down in various forms, and the mystery cycles survived today are long and very elaborate. Noah and his ark are always present. I suspect male masons today who go to see a mystery play will be particularly amused by the antics of Mrs. Noah, Noah's hectoring wife, who was initially very sceptical of her husband's ark-building obsession. The partners of masons may well side with her. These mystery plays probably had no direct bearing on the origins of the modern Masonic Noahite ritual, although we do know that Masons' guilds were regularly involved in their staging, as were the carpenters' guilds who often built the staging. Yet it's necessary to appreciate the importance of the Noah legend in English tradition, and we should not be surprised that it was referred to early in the history of English Freemasonry, because Noah was hugely important to early people of faith as the second father of mankind. So let's look at Noah's family. It seems that Noah had for many years been considered as one of the grand masters of Freemasonry, something many modern Masons have forgotten. From the 14th century onwards, the story of Noah's flood is given due prominence in the historical portion of the old manuscript Charges of the Masons, as is the non-biblical legends around Noah's great-grandfather Enoch, who had foreseen that God was about to bring disaster upon the earth. The first degree tracing board ritual used, albeit very rarely in my mother lodge, says merely, "We read early in Holy Writ that Abel brought a more acceptable teaching offering to the Lord than his brother Cain, that Noah was a just and upright man, teacher of righteousness, that Enoch walked with God and met his reward, and that Jacob wrestled with an angel, prevailed, and therefore obtained a blessing for himself and his posterity." There you are, all done and dusted in one, albeit long sentence. In an unpublished paper, which he very kindly updated for me in 1999, the late great John Mandelberg observes that as Royal Ark mariners, we are the custodians of a very ancient speculative tradition, even if virtually everyone else has forgotten it. So let's look at this table of patriarchs. We need to consider the family of Noah very carefully at this point. There are two genealogies of Noah, one in Genesis 4 and one in Genesis 5. And it's the latter which the rituals of the Royal Ark Mariner degree select. Using the priestly source genealogy of Genesis chapter 5, Noah comes from Adam, being 9 generations in descent from him. And you can see the first 10, in fact, all 20 of the biblical patriarchs there. From the first man, Adam, then his son Seth, then third, his son Enosh or Enos, and so on, through to the ones we are perhaps more familiar with: Jared, 7th, Enoch, 8th, Methuselah, 9th, Lamech, and then 10th, Noah. So after Adam and Noah, as the first men of the two new ages, firstly the creation, and then the post-Diluvian world, and whose stories are directly intertwined, as we shall see, we have Enoch as a key figure and much revered by early Freemasons. The 13th degree of the ancient and accepted rite in England and Wales, the Royal Arch of Enoch, explains that Enoch received a vision from God and showed him his true name, which Enoch concealed by constructing a series of underground vaults. The true name was discovered when Solomon built the temple, before it was lost again at the death of Hiram, as we know from the 3rd degree, and from the Holy Royal Arch. But this old legend is, in a Masonic degree, demonstrated at best only every 5 or 10 years or so. So it's hardly well known. As both the Royal Order of Scotland and the former 1871 version of the Mariner Installation Ceremony, the latter now entirely expunged for some unknown reason, the main Masonic legacy of Enoch was his creation of the 2 antediluvian pillars, one of brick and the other of stone, or one of brass and the other of marble, on which he inscribed the whole contemporary knowledge of the arts and sciences for the benefit of anyone who would survive the upcoming catastrophe he had foreseen. This is recorded by the Roman historian Flavius Josephus in his Antiquities of the Jews, Book 1, Chapter 3, written in the 1st century AD. Moving forward, it's worth noting that according to the Yahwistic source genealogy of Genesis chapter 4, Noah's half-brother was Tubal-Cain. Tubal-Cain will be well known to all craft masons for his skill with metalworking. But what's he doing in the craft degrees, which today focus on the building of King Solomon's temple, set 3,000 years later, when he is from the days of Noah and not the time of Solomon? Perhaps he is an unexplained throwback to an early Masonic tradition. Noah, of course, had 3 sons, Shem, Japheth, and Ham, of whom more anon in their attempts to raise their father from death. The fall from grace of Ham, having seen his father drunk and naked, is another story, but it's a family show, and it's one I haven't got time to explore today. In addition, there are various stories about the tomb of Adam being taken on the ark by Noah, and there are all sorts of connections hinted at in various local Masonic manuscripts, such as the 1724 Briscoe pamphlet, with respect to Noah's Ark, the tomb of Adam, the porphyry stone, and even the Ark of the Covenant. This is a most confused area, and I've not yet been able to research their legendary connections to my satisfaction. Then in the same family, we encounter Peleg, the 15th patriarch, and the direct descendant of Noah via his son Shem. Peleg is associated with the building of the Tower of Babel, another moral tale hitherto focused on in some Masonic degrees, but now barely remembered or worked at all. One thing we can say with certainty: all of this points to the importance in our traditions of the patriarch Noah and his whole family, his ancestors, Noah himself, his sons, and their descendants. So, back to Noah himself. In surviving the flood and being the father of the new human race, but none other Noah and his family had survived, Noah can be seen to represent a second Adam, and this makes him of enormous importance, notwithstanding his great skill in construction. For as we are told, Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations, and walked with God. For Christians, of course, Noah is mentioned in the genealogy in Luke chapter 3, which delineates Jesus' descent from Adam. In addition, in 2 of the Gospels, Matthew and Luke, Christ also uses the story of the flood, to quote, "in the days of Noah," comparing the great deluge to the effects of the coming of the Son of Man. That's in Matthew 24 and Luke 17. Now, we're now going to get to perhaps an area which will surprise many people. In construction and artistry terms, Noah was by no mean craftsman either, which must be a contributory factor in his being shown as a Masonic figure. The skill in building the ark would have been considerable. Indeed, some have seen the dedication and skill of Noah as a builder, with the enormous nature of the task and the importance of what he trusted on God's orders, as comparable, or at least identifiable, with that current Masonic centerpiece we all know so well, the building of King Solomon's temple. It's no surprise to find, therefore, that this view was one shared by early Masons. Indeed, Noah may well have been the early prototype or precursor of Hiram Abiff. There is much that could be said about Hiram Abiff, but not here. He barely gets a look in the biblical description of the building of the temple in the first book of Kings, chapter 7. A little more is said about him in the second book of Chronicles, chapter 2. Yet there is not one single reference to his death, let alone his murder. Yet there are clear legends associated with the death and raising of Noah in order to preserve his secrets. One of the early surviving Masonic documents is the Graham Manuscript, a catechism or summary of Masonic ritual, apparently dated 24th of October, 1726, 4 years earlier than the earliest written record describing the raising of Hiram. And it explicitly refers to the sons of Noah seeking the secret which their dead father had possessed in a manner very similar to the traditional history of the third degree. It refers to the 3 sons of Noah venturing to their father's grave to retrieve a secret. When he had died, any secret knowledge which he might have possessed had died with him. When they succeed in reopening the grave, the 3 sons each attempt to raise the body, each using one of the methods and grips, as in the current version of the Master Mason degree. It then lays out, without naming them, the 5 points of fellowship as we know them today. And there's a wonderful paper by Harry Mendoza, Marrow in the Bone, from 1994, which looks at this whole story in considerable detail. But in short, I don't want to spoil it for you. The Graham Manuscript gives a Noah story rather than a Hiramic one as the legend of the third degree. Whilst there is reference to Hiram and his work for King Solomon, it makes no mention of his death. It was not until 1730 that any detailed account was published of the death of Hiram Abiff, as we would recognise, this being in Pritchard's Masonry Dissected. The words he used to describe the raising of Hiram on the 5 points of fellowship are so similar to the raising of Noah in the Graham Manuscript that they must come from the same source. Pritchard, of course, was writing an expose, while the Graham Manuscript was almost certainly the personal aid memoir of a certain Thomas Graham, a master of lodges, as he's described, in Yorkshire. This has profound implications for Ark mariners, especially when one considers the central nature of what became the third degree of the craft. It would seem possible then that at some point, various Masons in authority decided to replace Noah with Hiram, and this change took place over time. As Scott Schwartzberg, who's here today, writes in his paper on Noah and Freemasonry of 2011, looking at the work of Chakravarti Sampath Madhavan in his Grand Lodge of India paper, The Hiramic Legend, Whence and Wherefore, one suggestion for the replacement of the Noah legend with that with which we are now familiar is that the story of Hiram Abiff, as created, contains elements that the death of the patriarch Noah so clearly lacked: betrayal, violent death, martyrdom, and revenge. This makes for a great ritual plot. Now, one only has to look at Anderson's 1783 constitutions to realise the key importance of both Noah and Enoch for early Freemasons. In addition, while all Master Masons may see themselves as sons of the widow, so are they too, by ancient Masonic tradition, all Noachites, Noachida, or sons of Noah. Anderson describes himself in 1738 as a true Noachida. And John Mandelberg rightly asked the question, in those days of little uniformity, was the Noah legend, and not that of Hiram, still being worked in some lodges in the late 1730s, to be referred to by Anderson, despite the emergence of Solomon's principal architect as he who had to be raised? There is so much else that could be said of the password leading from the second to the third degree, the implication that some of the signs in the third degree and in the Royal Ark Mariner degree, the clothing of mariner candidates, and so on. But you'll be glad to know there's no time here. All suggest, however, that the Noah legends were carelessly absorbed into what we all now recognise as the third degree. There is an enormous amount of work still to be done, not only in tracing the influence of the Noachite tradition on our current craft, ritual and tenets, but also in researching the shift from Noah's central importance in Masonry to his virtual disappearance, except only really in a meaningful, well-known way today in the Royal Ark Mariner degree. And that is still, of course, officially considered outside the 3 degrees of pure ancient Masonry, according to the United Grand Lodge in its 1813 Articles of Union, which you can see on the screen. This should not, however, lead us to ignore Masonry's Noachite heritage. Indeed, it's worthy of note, as I hinted earlier, that the Royal Order of Scotland, set up in the 1740s with the express purpose of correcting and reforming the abuses of the craft, gives back to Noah, the Ark, the Flood, and indeed Enoch some degree of prominence. Section 4 of the Royal Degree of the Heraldry of Kilwinning particularly focuses on Noah and his great-grandfather Enoch. I know because as junior warden, I had to learn it. Those who created the Royal Order of Scotland clearly saw Noah and the Noachite tradition as of more than passing importance, and they took it within their ritual. Indeed, Noah's flood is specifically referred to in one of the catechisms as one of the 3 great events that Freemasons should commemorate, along with 2 other big ones, the creation and the Christian belief in the redemption of man. And it's the one in the middle. Noah was also very important to the early church, as well as to the founding fathers of Freemasonry. The Reverend Neville Barker Cryer, whose books many of you will have read, makes a clear reference to this, as may well be inferred from the address to the new commander, when he states that by the turn of the first millennium of the Christian era, Noah has become a direct prefiguring of Christ himself, a man chosen by God to save mankind and to usher in a new covenant. And we know from those 2 gospel quotes, that's what the gospel writers describe Christ as saying too. So what of Enoch? Strange also that whilst the ritual of elevation today makes reference to Noah's father, Lamech, to his grandfather, Methuselah, and to his great-great-grandfather, Jared, it completely ignores the 3rd one on the list, his great-grandfather, as also does completely now the installation of the commander ceremony. And I'm referring to Enoch. It's been left to the revived Royal Ark Mariner Tracing Board, which probably dates from the late 18th century and reflects the legacy of the ancients in the history of our approaches to our ritual stories, and its accompanying lecture, now canon in Ark Masonry, to restore Enoch to his place in Ark Mariner Masonry. Interestingly, Enoch was made much of in the ceremony of installation of the commander, published in 1871. As I have noted, since then, I'm not sure when it happened, the address has been omitted, and I don't know why. So recently, the tracing board was revived with an official lecture published in 1995 under the authority of the Grand Master's Royal Ark Council. The tracing board is similar in style and look, the original one, not this copy, to a warrant dated 1796, issued to a certain Charles Sinclair by a body referred to as the Grand Lodge of Ark Mariners. An expert suggests that the board I'm going to show you in a minute was painted about that time. As I say, this is the new Mark version of it. And I've obviously pulled this one out, so it would have been thinner, of course. Being a board from the time of the ancients, it contains many more elements than one would expect from a purely Royal Ark Mariner tracing board based on today's official ritual. The bits that I've highlighted in blue refer to Enoch. See the pillars? That in green, obviously, to Noah. But look how many don't refer to Noah at all. Yeah, he's the central figure of our main ritual today. And the yellow referring actually to the building of King Solomon's temple. But not of least importance, almost there in the middle, is the reference to the 2 pillars of Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah, one made of brick, one made of marble, both for the purpose of containing and protecting the archives of wisdom. And I want to give a plug now to Glenn Cook and to others from the Allied Masonic Degrees of America, because I have to say that the American past commander jewel is wonderful. It shows the 2 pillars as well as the rainbow. And I've also put there the one which they also allow for the ordinary Ark Mariners. I have to say, although I don't like the Ark Mariner one as much, I think the Noah one is absolutely beautiful. And I've just bought one from the USA. I'll probably try and wear it in a ceremony in the future. This is not the time to discuss the wide variety of symbols on the board, which you can now see more clearly. But the close proximity of so many symbols from a variety of degrees shows clearly the links which early arc masonry had with others, such as the Royal Arch, the Select Master, the Excellent Master, and of course the Mark. As Neville Barker Cryer so perceptively observes in his book, The Arch and the Rainbow, this tracing board so recently introduced reminds any arc mariner of the older setting within which this degree existed from its inception. It links the past with the present and also tradition with current practice. And it's also now one of our last surviving links with the patriarch Enoch. The present origins of the Royal Ark Mariner are unknown, and there is no time today, you will be relieved to know, as he's still going on, to go into them. However, going to get a bit of history from a history teacher. However, the earliest confirmed record of such a degree being worked in England is 1790 in Bath, although the existence of Noahite traditions in the body of English masonry is suggested as early as 1726, as we know. There are claims that by 1755, the ceremony called the Ark and the Dove was being worked in the then American colonies. A version of that degree is one of the 2 mariner degrees today controlled by the American Order of Allied Masonic degrees. There is also the Ark, Mark, Link, and Wrestle sequence of degrees, which seems to have spread to parts of England from Ireland and were being worked the latest by 1810, while the 2 brass plates from about 1715, which the ancient stone in Scotland own, show both Noah's Ark and a rainbow-style arch also, alongside the obvious craft and other degree symbols. In Paris, in 1816, we have the very short-lived Order of French Noachite, while we also still have 2 degrees, however, extant today in England, which are Noachite in origin. One is the 18th degree of the Knight Templar priests of pendant degrees, and it's called the degree of the Royal Prussian Blue. This seems to be an amalgamation of the older Irish degree of Noachite and a degree of the same name worked in the southwest of England, particularly in Cornwall. The other is the unworked 21st degree of the ancient accepted rite of England and Wales, Patriarch Noachite. In the ancient accepted Scottish rite, as worked in the southern Masonic jurisdiction of the USA, it is called Noachite or Prussian Knight, but with little reference to Noah. And this is the symbol and an apron taken from one of their books. The northern Masonic jurisdiction has another degree, the same degree, also called Patriarch Noachite, but it now has no reference to Noah or his wider family at all. All 3 were originally versions from French and German origin of what became part of the 25-degree rite of perfection before being absorbed into the 33-degree system which we know today under the 1786 Grand Constitutions. Yet only the English and Wales Supreme Council 21st degree, even though we don't work it, has retained any real connection with Noachite ideas. The Prussian references are a complete red herring and come from the idea of association with Frederick the Great, much disputed today, but grow when people want to have chivalric and royal antecedents to their degrees. Carlyle's Manual of Freemasonry, that expose of masonry published between 1825 in various exposes and 1845, asserts with absolutely no evidence that the degree had first been conceived by Prussian knights in the Crusades. A total myth. The American Southern Masonic jurisdiction rite, since the work of Albert Pike, SMJ's great reviser, has pushed Noah aside, and there is now only passing references to Phaleg or Peleg and the doomed construction of the Tower of Babel. As you will remember, the descendants of Noah tried to build the Tower of Babel in the valley of Shinar, as Genesis says, to make a name for themselves. The Lord then, after about 53 years, according to some calculations, confused the language of the builders, and they were scattered throughout the world for trying to be greater than they were. So while the moral teachings of Noah's descendants and the Tower of Babel remain in the 2 versions extant in England, that of the accepted rite is never worked, and the KTP appendant degree very, very rarely indeed. Exit the Noachite Tower of Babel. such an important moral tale from our Masonic belief system. You'll be glad to know we're coming to an end. So the idea that a Grand Lodge of Ark Mariners was formed in 1772 and presided over by the Duke of Sussex is really not convincing. So the latter claims that the Grand Lodge had fallen into disuse, having to be revived in 1871, do not really stand up. I wish it had been so formed and revived, as my own Mother Royal Ark Mariner Lodge was originally granted its warrant on the 7th of May, 1872, by the Supreme Grand Commander, Morton Edwards, the Grand Master of that supposed body. But it wasn't. Whilst the Mariner degree seems to have been practiced in a variety of ways in a host of different lodges over a fairly long period, there was probably no active, properly functioning Grand Lodge over the degree until 1870. There's so much I could say, but not today. However, the degree, however worked, had almost disappeared when it was so revived, allegedly, in this supposed Grand Lodge of Ark Mariners under Morton Edwards in 1871. However, as some lodges had also begun to work the degree, they were in conflict with the Grand Lodge of Master Masons, formed in 1856, when Canon Portal, then Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Master Masons, announced peremptorily in 1870 that as the degree of Ark Mariner had been worked in Mark lodges since 1790, then the Mark would protect the Royal Ark Mariner degree under a new Grand Master's Royal Ark Council. So my Mariner Lodge has to petition for a new warrant, and that's the first year of its life officially forgotten. And don't get me started on Portal. The Grand Lodge of Master Masons thus preserved the degree, but it also led to it being relegated somewhat to a merely adjunct, a curious little Noah-based degree, regarded by many, regrettably, as I heard on a Zoom only this week, as of little importance. So, whilst we've had a truly whistle-stop tour of some of the traditions and practice within Noachite Masonry, as well as considering the almost disappearance of Noah and his family from our rituals, I've probably put you to sleep. Despite all I have said, we are fortunate to be left with the Royal Ark Mariner degree, even with nothing much else. As the late worship brother Hanfield Jones wrote, when fully understood, it captures the hearts of its members as one of the jewels of Masonic ritual. How right he was. Thank you for listening, if you have, and I'd like to answer any questions, as well as to learn from those of you who know about this far better than me, if anybody is still there.
Thank you, Matthew. I found that absolutely fascinating.
That was an awful lot to take in one go, Matthew. You say you're going to write a book on it? Well, I look forward to reading it when I can. One question regarding the Ark Mariner. In various side orders, other degrees, when you go into them, you wear whatever apron. Do you wear a mark apron to enter the Mariner?
Yes, you do.
Thank you. That's all I wanted to know. Thank you, Matthew.
You've got to be in the mark in England and Wales to do it.
Matthew, just like to thank you for a brilliant presentation. I'm just wondering, as Grand Master of Mark, when you will be doing a demonstration of some of these old ancient rituals in University Royal Ark Mariner.
Well, if it's the 21st degree, you have to ask the Grand Secretary General, who is now hiding his face, who won't allow it, I suspect. And we could ask Glenn Cook if he'd let us do. I think the one that I'd like to do is called the Ark and the Dove. They have two versions in America under Allied Masonic degrees. The one that we would recognise, although it's a Scottish version, and then this rather more dramatic one, the Ark and the Dove, which is older. Very few councils work it now, but it's a bit of an honorary degree they give, and I'd love to work that. Glenn has very kindly given me the degree to look at, and I'd love to work that. I think it'd be great fun, and we can but ask.
I'm looking forward to witnessing it.
Matthew? Thank you, Matthew.
Matthew, do you think there may be the slightly salacious aspects of one of Noah's sons might have been a reason for that, for him and that legend disappearing from a potential use in the third degree, maybe sidelined as not politically correct, as it were?
I think that's very interesting, Ian. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, and because obviously, the story is that Ham sees his father drunk and naked and makes a bit of a fuss about it, and so his father curses him. And whilst that's bad enough, it's used later on as the reason why the Canaanites are sort of banished and not part of the not accepted as part of the sort of whole Israelitish group, and the nation's divided into three different nations. And actually, if you're in Secret Monitor in the Prince degree, there's a reference to strangers, and the words used to describe them also comes from this legend. So I think you could well be right. It was embarrassing, and it's undignified, and that may be the reason for those of you who are Cork Masons, whilst Ham appears in the Cork spoof degree, where he doesn't appear in the Ark Mariner. So you could well be right. I think for me, it's partly that, but also he doesn't die in an exciting way. He just dies at advanced old age, and I think the murder of the architect gives such potential to have secrets lost, whereas the Noah secrets, presumably had been handed down through the patriarchs, through Seth. So I suspect it's because and because there's no Hiram Abiff is hardly mentioned, you can do great things with him because you can entirely invent him. Whereas it's perhaps a bit more difficult to mess about with the great patriarch Noah, particularly as you say when there's dodgy things. But that's pure speculation. But I think it's very good speculation.
Yeah,
Matthew, and
whole new chapter. Thank you.
When I present the Royal Ark Mariner tracing board, and I get to a certain part, the little tents which are at the bottom of the board, on the bottom right hand side.
Yeah.
That I refer to Ham, and I point out the tents, and I usually explain to the brethren afterwards about that story, which of course it isn't really included. But that's the reference, that those little tents in the bottom of the board.
You're entirely right, Phil. I'm not surprised. There are 4 tents, aren't there? And I think we assume that one is Noah and his wife's, and one is his sons and his wife's.
Yes.
So why is Ham not in it? Yeah, I'm sure. Of course, he's not mentioned at all. It is odd, though, how things have got expunged completely without any reference to him at all. It would have made a good bit of the ceremony.
Yeah. I thought you might be interested. You mentioned Morton Edwards, and I came across an article in the Masonic Examiner of October the 2nd, 1871, which quotes the warrant which was granted by John F. Dorrington, who was the Grand Commander, and it just starts off, "We, the Grand Lodge of the most ancient and honourable fraternity of Ark Masons, granted by Grandfather Methuselah, who lived 250 years with Adam and died but a short time before the flood," and it goes on and on and on. But it's quite an interesting subject.
Yeah, it's a very famous piece, and it was used to give, obviously, all sorts of recognition by using the patriarchs, who we're of course less knowledgeable about today.
Yes.
It's interesting, though, there was a real attempt to give authority to these supposed Grand Lodges, and the certificate which Mark Grand Lodge has about, which is the supposed one of this early degree, this early Grand Lodge, is clearly been tampered with. If you look in Neville Blocker-Cryer's book, he talks about the 3 seals, and 2 of them have clearly been tampered to make them look older.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's almost certainly a forgery. But, this is not new. Masons are always trying to find, reasons why something is older than it really is. So, but yeah, it's interesting. It was clearly a very desirable thing, because it was not controlled by anybody. It's such a good story. It could be used. And of course, the bit that annoys me about Portal, many things annoy me about Portal, as Jim Daniel knows, who's the expert, is that even though he was an Oxford Mason, he turned on Morton Edwards out of rivalry. And of course, he did it for the reason that we'll take on the Ark Mariners so we don't want any more new bodies of being formed. And he then sort of almost immediately formed the Royal and Select Masters. So Portal was very happy to have new bodies if he was the Grand Master of them. but he wasn't very happy if he wasn't. And I think we should see Portal as certainly not just a great Masonic enthusiast, but but somewhat power hungry, I think.
Jeff Gill.
Yeah. Hi, Matthew. Thanks. That was a really interesting lecture. In your researches, I know you mentioned you referenced Pritchard, but did you come across any particular point at which the Noachite degrees were initially instituted?
I mean, there's lots and lots of little scraps of suggestion of arc degrees of some sort, which are before the Graham Manuscript, but there's no way of knowing if what they're referring to is arc masonry or Noachite masonry. That's the trouble.
Yeah.
So
I was looking at the Regis manuscript several years ago, and in compiling a paper on that, I came across some references to Noachite masonry at that time.
I think he's in the Cook manuscript too. I mean, they like to use Noah because he's a famous old person from the past of biblical significance, but just because they mention him and they mention Noah and that idea, it doesn't necessarily mean that there was masonry. But I just don't know. I mean, I just need to,
I think we're all in that though.
Yeah, we need to collaborate and do some work on that, because it's really interesting. But where reference to Noah equals any kind of Noachite degree we're never going to know. We can only speculate.
Thanks, Matthew.
Colin.
Yes. Hello, Matthew. Thank you for your lecture. Two things. First of all, an observation, and then secondly, a question. I don't know whether you're aware of the writings of Brother John Acaster, who published his paper about the Graham Manuscript and gave evidence that it's a copy of a 1672 document, and also the fact that it was quoted from in 1724 in another document, the Whole Institution of Freemasonry. The thing I found really interesting in his expose was that there was a definite link between elements in the Graham Manuscript and the published 1584 book, The Discoveries of Witchcraft, which shows that some of the writings that were in the Graham Manuscript go back considerably earlier than we wanted. That's just an observation. The question relates to the tracing board. The tracing board is obviously a ancient tracing board, and it's even described as being in use well before 1790 in the book, but there's evidence of a similar tracing board being used much earlier than that, and indeed it contains, as you're well aware, elements on the tracing board which relate to degrees that are now found elsewhere, whereas in the ancients they were all able to be conferred in the one lodge, and therefore the same tracing board was used for many degrees. The question to come out of that is, are you happy with the old tracing board as we use it, which contains elements that we should not discuss in a Mariner's Lodge, or would you prefer to find a new tracing board which more closely represents the lecture that we've been doing basically since the late 1950s?
Thank you for that. It's very interesting. The first point you make about the earlier suggestions that the Graham Manuscript is earlier, I've read stuff on it. I don't know how convinced I am, in that I haven't done any personal research on it, and so I'm a bit worried about saying, giving it earlier credence of being earlier than I can definitely feel I know it to be. So I didn't want to go into that today. So I do know about it. I'm not sure. It's one of those things just need to look at in much more detail, and I should be knocking at your door, Colin, obviously. With respect to finding a new tracing board, I don't want to find a new one. I don't want to invent a new one.
No.
I like the fact that we have the tracing board now, and it's now actually published in the Ritual. You haven't just got to buy the Hertfordshire Masons' own private 55 little booklet, which I've got about it. It's now canon, if you like, in arc masonry. And I like the fact that it's got things in it which people can go, why is there a trumpet? What's the key about? you know, why are the ashlars there? I think that's really good because it leads to questions.
Yes.
I mean, as we all know, the idea of degrees being separate and being governed differently, and you're paying more money to be, you buy another apron, another sash, another jewel. That's not how it was. And I'm much more I'd love to go back to it being a bit more chaotic. Actually, I'd like that, where you could have a degree conferred on you by somebody at the end of a meeting, and that's as it used to be, and I like that. So no, I like the fact it's archaic. It's slightly it's not easily explained, and it can't all be spoken about in a lodge, but you can tell people, you can discuss the symbol. So it's actually a springboard, you could argue, rather than a tracing board. Yes. And so I would definitely keep it. I like it. I'm not sure I particularly like the new Mark Mason's version of it. It's clearer, but I would like them to have coloured it, but kept the old drawing. But obviously they've made things like the veils clearer, which are not very clear in the first one. They look like organ pipes actually in the original. But yeah, and I'd like to see. There must be lodges who use the other tracing boards that are around. I've just never been lucky enough to go to one where they use other tracing boards.
Thank you. Theodore.
Good evening, Matthew from Athens. We would like to thank you and congratulations for your excellent lecture. I have sent you privately now a photo, and I don't know if you can put it on. In my last research, before a few months, before COVID crisis in London, I found the man that he discovered in Mark Mason's hall, the tracing board, beginning of 1970s, and he was John Edward Noel Walker, a very popular at that time English Mason, and he was one of those that he wrote down the tracing board that we have in our ritual. I don't know if you can add his photo for everybody.
I'm trying to do it. It might be. Hang on. Let me just. I have to share the screen. Hang on a second. Not being very efficient here. Share screen.
Yes. Here is John Walker, the man that he discovered in Mark Mason Hall in the beginning of 1970s, the tracing board of this degree.
Thank you.
And he wrote one of those that he wrote the tracing board lecture.
Fascinating.
Thank you very much. I'd love to learn a bit more about that. Thank you.
Yeah, he was a founder of St. Thomas of Aquin and Pilgrim Preceptor too.
We'll have a chat about that when we have another of our chats, Theodore. Thank you very much.
Alan.
Hi, good evening, Matthew. Thank you for the talk. And well, I've been in touch with the ritual Ark and the Dove, and as you said, it's fantastic. But I did not find what I was looking for, is that the origin and the relation with the master degree. I think, and I would like to know from you, in our old tracing board, in the Royal Ark Mariner degree, we have some ciphers. I believe that maybe some of those ciphers were used to note or to help in the lectures. But I believe that maybe not just in the lecture of the Royal Ark Mariner degree, but in some of the other degrees, maybe as an ancient tracing board, use it not just for one degree, but more. Maybe there could point us a direction. What do you think about that?
Well, I'd say I have no idea. So I'd love to have a chat with you about that. So I don't feel I can answer really, but so I don't know. But maybe you could email me, Alan, and we can have a chat about it. I'd love to know a bit more about that. Thank you. Okay. I don't know much about Masonic ciphers except the basic stuff. So I'd like to know a bit more. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any others?
Hello, yeah, it's Simon from Surrey, Mark and Ram. Mentioned earlier about Babel. I've never seen Babel in anything Masonic. Did you say where that was, or did I miss?
Yeah, it appears it appears very much in the. There are 2 degrees. There's the degree, one of the appendant degrees of Knight Templar priests. And they've actually published their rituals. They've as best they can. There's a book you can get from Grand College, and that it's called Royal Prussian Blue, and that's about the Tower of Babel. And also in the 21st degree of the accepted rite, which is not published and not available, there's a similar story. I know I haven't seen the degree. Actually, I've only read the commentaries on it, because the ones that are practiced in America have basically got rid of it entirely. Northern Masonic completely, and the Southern right at the end, having had an entire ceremony based on a kind of secret council based on Prussian nobility and a Saxon pretender. It's really bizarre. They then say, don't be like Peleg and build a Tower of Babel that you shouldn't be doing. So that's where it is. It's referred to. It's also referred to in the Royal Order of Scotland, ironically, as one of the 7 wonders of the world, which is extraordinary, because the Tower of Babel does not exist anywhere else as the 7 wonders of the world, but bizarrely, it is in the Royal Order, and that's really weird. But that's the only reference to it in the whole of the Royal Order degree. So, but it's the reason why the best version that's extant, the only real version that's extant, is the Appendant Order of the Knights Templar Priests. And we know that's based on an Irish degree called Noachite, about which we don't know very much. We know a bit about it. And there's some fragments of that, and also degrees worked in particular in Cornwall. What's interesting about Freemasonry is that areas of the country which are cut off, South Cornwall and bits of the northwest, particularly Lancashire and around there, they tend to have variants, either because they're cut off and they just got away with it, because there was no real scrutiny, or places like Bristol, obviously, with its Baldwin Rite and everything, where they're getting a lot coming in from the sea. But once you get inland and you get into populated, civilized parts of the country, everything gets controlled very quickly once Grand Lodge is properly formed. So I hope that answers. But if you want to look at the degree, look at get the KTP Appendant Degrees book, and it's in there. It's only quite short, but it's very clear about the Tower of Babel. And there's more about Noah as well, about the 7 precepts of Noah. And it's unusual because actually it's a degree that is held outside in the light of the moon. It's quite interesting.
Thank you. Payam.
Thank you very much. That's 3 things I'm not in, which is why I'd never come across it. So I appreciate that answer. Thank you.
Hi, Matthew. Thank you for the great talk. Just a quick question. So we know why the Noah sent a dove out in the story, but we also there's mention of a raven or a crow being sent out as well. Does that get mentioned any of the material related to Ram? I mean, I haven't seen it in the ceremony itself, but does it come up anywhere? Or
I've not seen any. I have seen a reference. I have a feeling, and if Jeff is still here, he could tell me, the raven might be in the Ark and the Dove, but I don't think it is. It might be. If it's anything, it's only in that one, not in the Scottish ritual, the Irish ritual. So if it does exist, it'll be in the Ark of the Dove. It's just worth saying, though, about the Allied Masonic degrees in America. It's a bit of an invitation-only order, or you only join if you want to do Masonic research. They've got a whole series of degrees, many more than we have in our Allied, but they're very much for the people who've done the York Rite, done the Scottish Rite, and you've got to be even more obsessive than some of us to get to have time to do that as well. So although it's in America and it's beautiful, not many people see it. It's hard. I mean, the Mariners has virtually disappeared in America, except for the Allied Masonic degrees, which is a tiny fraction of Freemasons do.
Matthew, Jeff Bennett, Texas.
Hello, Jeff, wherever you are.
Right here.
I can see you. Sorry, hello.
Yeah, so yes, it's an invitational body on the York Rite, what we call the York Rite side of things. You have to be a Royal Arch Mason to be considered for membership. It is an invitational body, and our grand sovereign grand master was actually on the call, Glenn Cook, at one point. I don't know if he's dropped off or not, but in Texas, we have several councils. We only allow 27. The national body only allows 27 active members on the rolls, and if you don't attend a meeting in a 24-month period without an excuse, you could be dropped off the roll. And we've in my council, we've actually past sovereign masters have actually been taken from membership. So says Glenn Cook says in the, if you want to recognize him.
Yeah, Glenn is still here. So Sovereign Grand Master, perhaps can you tell us some bits more after what Jeff has said?
Well, I would add to Jeff's comments. He's a very diligent Mason and AMD Mason there in Tejas. The purpose here in the United States is limited and is particularly to study the ritual and for lectures, and is very much devoted to that. We purposely keep the council small to develop a feeling of camaraderie amongst the members. That doesn't mean that new councils can't be instituted, and that's relatively easy. It takes one current Allied Masonic degree member, as well as a requisite number of Royal Arch Masons to form a new council. And so we have approximately 141 across the United States and the Philippines.
Thank you. I mean, I love the fact that it's Masons of 27, which many brethren will understand the significance of that. So that's fantastic. Thank you very much, Glenn. Thanks for staying.
Okay.
But talking about the conferral of the degrees, sometimes individual councils confer the degrees. In Texas, we have one day, usually in the summertime, and we all meet in Waco, which is central in the state, and we put on a full day, kind of like a festival or something, and we pick out certain degrees and choose, and not always are you seeing the same degrees every year. So it's kind of, we switch it around because we can't do all the degree work in one day.
So can I just ask then, to those of you who are involved in the Allied in America, how often is the Ark and the Dove done compared to the Scottish Ram that you have? Because the Ark and the Dove looks fantastic.
In my experience across the United States, it is much more infrequent, given partly because of the number of degrees that we wish to confer, as well as the installation ceremonies that are conferred. And it's useful to remember that in our councils, we open as a council, not necessarily in a particular degree, such as St. Lawrence the Martyr, that we confer.
Great. We'll have to ask if we could be allowed to demonstrate it, or perhaps, Glenn, when you're over in the UK, as you often are, you could perhaps bring some others to demonstrate it. I'd love to see it.
Certainly, we'd be happy to discuss that with the Grand Lodge and see what their wishes would be.
Great. Thank you.
Perfect. Matthew, thank you very much. I'm just going to ask the Provincial Grand Master just to sum up, if we may.
Yes, hello everybody. Matthew has done a very interesting and thought-provoking talk there. I'm so delighted that he was able to do that. I do hope everybody has really enjoyed themselves. We're going to go away a lot wiser than we started this evening off. Well, and Matthew is as well. He's learned a few things too. But I ideally hope you've all enjoyed yourselves. I'm rather looking forward if we can do another one of these. The class of improvement will be having another Zoom on the 6th of August. And we'll circulate that when we know if we're having a speaker and who the speaker is. But yes, enjoy yourselves. Thank you for attending, and God bless you all.